Welcome back, everyone, to our Framelock folder series. This is episode 5. If you haven't been following along, please refer to the playlist in the description of this video where you can start at episode 1 up to where we are right now. So in our last video, we got our frame relieved here. We also released our lock bar and we drilled and set our detent ball. Now it's time to do some profiling on our frames. We're going to do a little contouring. So this will make them a little smoother and more ergonomic in the hand, feel a little more comfortable and soft. I've already done some softening on the insides where we'll be flipping our blade open here, and here where we manipulate the lock bar. We haven't bent the lock bar because we need to do this contouring. And just a reminder, all of the tools that I'm using in this video, like mills and drills and stuff like that, they'll be linked in the description as affiliate links. And if you're looking for any of this stuff, I would appreciate you using those affiliate links. They help the channel. So I've got some lines scribed here. I just used a height gauge and put some lines here for reference marks. This helps me to keep everything symmetrical as I'm doing the contouring. So let's get set up on the grinder and get this done. All right, we got our profiling done, and you can see it's just slightly profiled. I don't do nothing radical. I kind of like the squareness in the flat right here for indexing, and it's just softened all over. I've softened everything that can be softened. Nothing done right here where the backspacer goes. We don't want to create a gap there. And it's sanded up to about 600 grit, and I'll do a little more work before final assembly. Do some touch-ups because I am going to do some scratching, and it's going to depend on the finish we do, whether it's going to be bead blasted and stone washed and anodized, whatever. That's going to be up to you as a maker on the finish and or the buyer or customer what they want. So the next thing we're going to do is bend our lock bar. I'm going to come in here and heat it where we did our relief work and bend it over to about there. Now I could bend this by hand by pushing it or putting in something there and prying it, but I don't really like to do that. I don't want anything to bow. I want it to bend right here, and I don't want it bowing here because I'm gonna put a precise heat here and it'll pretty much bend at the weakest point, and that will create a good spring. I'll bend it to here, but if I find that the spring is too strong, I can always come back later and push it over a little bit to take some pressure off of that spring. So let's go heat it up, bend it over. All right, I'm just putting them together to check the detent, make sure the spring is not too hard, not too soft. And I want to check centering here. And so you can just see here, drops in there good, but it's not too hard. This one's pretty good. It's good and centered. But if you have one that's not centered, you want to make sure after you do all this profiling and sanding, outside and inside, you want to double check if it's not centering. Make sure your spacer width is correct. It should be the exact distance of your blade plus the space on each side of it with your bearings or washers or whatever you're using. Same thickness here. And you should have drilled and reamed your hole straight. Now, another thing to do or consider is when you're drilling and reaming pivots is to use a pivot lap instead of a reamer. A pivot lap will allow you to dial it in deadly accurate. And it's basically a brass tool, looks like kind of like a reamer with a polisher on it. And you polish and you keep polishing until your pivot fits exactly. Just something to consider. You can get those from McMaster Car. I didn't use them in here. Takes longer to do, to dial them in, but it's well worth it. I just used a reamer on these, and but you better make sure everything is good and square on your mill or drill or whatever you're using. I've got one that's not lining up. I've checked everything, and my spacer and all that's good, blade straight, hole is good and tight, but I noticed that my pivot was a little long and my pivot screw was bottoming out. That's because of the sanding I did, and that's that kind of stuff on the inside to clean it up, because you want your pivot to be slightly under your frame so your pivot don't spin and you can tighten it up. Now this is something I made, but you can buy these. They're called pivot laps, and they're a lot more elaborate the ones you buy. This is just a piece of steel with an exact hole for a pivot that I can put in there, and I can set it on my lap plate like this, put my finger on it, and just take some off of it. I'll take a little off, check it. If it's not enough, I'll do it again until I've got enough space below the frame where that pivot don't spin, because it can also throw the squareness and centering off on your blade. That needs to be square anyway. All right, let's see if we did any good. Yeah, that's a whole lot better. Now, I still may have to adjust the spring strength on these. Matter of fact, this is the frame that I messed up in the second or third video that I'm going to be keeping for myself. It's not too bad. Now, the bearings and all that will have to break in, but looks pretty good. But the next thing we're going to do is cut the lock faces on the blades so that the spring will jump over in there and lock them up. Before we go to the grinder though, we have to mark where we need to make that cut. I'm going to first put some Sharpie on here. You can use Dykem or something expensive like that, or you can just do this. Then I'll put it back together. You want to put it together just like it's going to be when it's finished to do this next step, because you don't want any issues caused from wobble or slack. Put it together, tighten it up like it's going to be. All right, with the blade fully opened, I'm going to put just a little pressure here to make sure it doesn't move like this. I'm going to take a razor blade, and we've got the blade marked in there. I'm going to come in here. You want a razor blade or something thin. There's even thinner razor blades than this. But I want to come in here, favor the lock bar side, and scribe it. All right, that should do it. So we'll take it apart, take a look at it, and make sure we got a good mark, and then I'll meet you at the grinder. All right, we're going to get our rest set up to cut our lock face. I like to use 7.5 degrees. Some people use 7, some people use 8, but I really like 7.5. I've had good luck with that. I'm going to stick with it. Now, I use a cheap angle finder. I don't know where I got this one, but I'm sure you can get them anywhere, Amazon too. I'll look and put up one in the description. So what I want to do is put it on my platen and zero it out. And I want this at 7.5 degrees. So that's pretty square there. So I'm about 7.6. Once I get that done, I'm going to put a 120 grit belt on here. Make sure your blade is you're cutting your angle on the right side, which it should be if you got it marked, but you want your angle to be right. And I'll be using a pair of optivisors to see what I'm doing, and I'm going to be sneaking up on this line. You don't want to cut all the way to your line. You're going to make several trips back and forth to your blade, assembling it, trying it. Now, the reason you want to sneak up on this, if you overgrind it, you're done. This blade is trash for that frame anyway. But I'm going to sneak up on this line, go check it, keep checking it till I'm close, and then I'll finish it off with a 220 grit belt. I think that was 4 trips. We should be close here because we was inside that little bevel I made earlier on the lock bar. I'm going to mark this so I can see where it's hitting it. We want the lockup to happen right at the top of your lock face. It's free here. So there's a slight angle there, but we want lockup right there in one spot. So let's get it together and take a look at it. All right, so we've got early lockup there, which I like. Everything's tight. We're still good on our blade centering. Working like it should. Now it's going to be stiff and a little sticky until you break it in. That bearing also has to wear a little track on your blade, so it'll be kind of squeaky and rough. But you can put a little oil in there and it'll help it along till it gets broke in. Then it'll be smooth as glass. But I want to see where we're getting our lockup. I don't know if you can see it, but it's right at the top up there. Right there, which is what we want. All right. So I will open and close these things just like you're seeing there, probably 40 or 50 times to break them in. Once they get broke in, though, they're good to go. I have another little trick we're going to do before I grind the blades on the lock face. And what we're going to do is come right here where this detent ball groove stops and comes off of the lock face. So we come here and we're going to grind a ramp right here. This will give it a very nice touch when it's opening and closing, and it's not so hard on your detent ball. I've already done this one. I can show you what I'm talking about. So right now the ball is off, comes on, real smooth transition. So we're locked up. You can see that ramp there. That's what we're going for. And you coming in at like a 45, and then I kind of slope it up toward the track or the groove that the detent is made into the blade. Just be very careful because you can mess up your lockup if you come across here and gouge it and mess it up. You just want to lightly cut it. I use a 1/8 carbide burr, but you can go like 3/32 smaller. I just using the 1/8 because that's what's in my chuck right now. So I'll grind one and show you how that's done. All right, so now it's time to start grinding our bevels. I'm not going to go through all of that. There's several videos I have of showing specifically how to grind bevels, but I just wanted to show you what I have set up to grind folder blades. It's just a bar of steel with a hole in it the size of the pivot, and I get the blade square to where my plunge line and bevel lines will be square with the blade. Then it's just tightened up. I've got a couple reference marks in there for my center line. I'll get these all ground and hand sanded, then I'll assemble them. Then we'll take a look at some tuning and final finishing and that sort of thing. And we'll be back right now. All right, they're ground. Now I can start the hand sanding. And that's something I wanted to stop and show you a little bit about. Techniques for hand sanding hollow ground blades. Now these are ground down to about 15 thousandths or less. These are primarily made as hunting knives, specifically skinning knives. When I was designing these knives, that's what I had in mind because I prefer a pocket knife for a skinning knife. And when I'm hunting, that's what I carry. If I'm camping or something like that, I'll carry a bigger knife, maybe a belt knife, but I prefer always, and that's what I carry every day, is a folder. And I wanted a folding skinning knife. Now this blade is only about 3.5, 3 3/4 long. It'll take care of almost any big game animal in North America. You don't have to have a giant knife for skinning and dressing game. I only carry big hunting knives with me. Oh yeah, I bet you feel like you're in a Wild West movie, huh? Well yeah, makes me look bad. Oh yeah. Like this big buck stainless knife. Why didn't you use that one the other day when you were skinning that little deer you killed? Yeah, you was using a little small knife. Matter of fact, he was using a little small skinning knife. You couldn't sharpen that thing with a side grinder anyway. That's a junk. That stainless is not the same as this stainless. Anyway, that's why these are designed like they are. But let's get back on topic here, and I want to show you some tips and tricks for hand sanding hollow ground blades. Like I always tell people, there's no shortcuts to anything. There are some things you can do for efficiency and to help better do your job. And there are a lot of gimmicks out there, but this works. So with a hollow ground blade, you can't do things like you do traditionally or normally with a flat ground blade. You can just take a flat sanding stick and get in there, but this is different. This is hollowed out. First thing I do is I take something that I make. It's just a stick here, a block of wood with an angle cut here. I take a strip of sandpaper, put it in here, and you have to clean up these plunge lines. Now this is finished up to 400 grit. And you know, while some people may like that finish like it is, there's no problem with that. I like to finish them up to a 600 grit satin. I like to get in here with this tool and clean up these plunge lines first. And I'll work this all the way up to 600 grit until I get all the scratches out of there. You can see them in there. Maybe you can, I don't know with that angle, but they're in there. But I will clean that up. Then I will take another tool, which is shaped at the contour of my 6-inch wheel. Just another block of wood. I will stick a piece of sandpaper on there with some spray adhesive. Goes on there like that. And I work that bevel. This will make you have good even scratches, and I'll work it up to the final satin finish. I'll show you the final result here in just a minute, as you can see what I'm working with. So you can see we run around 12 thousandths on the edge, and they like that across the board. So now that the blades are done, the thing I need to do is making sure these scales are clean. I've already cleaned them up on the inside, but make sure everything's clean, double check. Then I've also got a couple that I need to trim the pivots on the back side. I need to shape them, sculpt them a little bit. So I mark the pivot where it needs to be ground down to from the top, and I'm just going to shape this into a slight point, but have a blunt end to it, just kind of decorative. Then I'll assemble them together, and we can talk about some tweaking and tuning we can do, and about finish work. So I'll get these sanded, we'll put them together, and we'll take a look at them. Yeah, so that turned out pretty good. Went ahead and assembled this one. Make sure everything's working good. So just to go over a couple things on tuning. First of all, you need to make sure that your pivot holes are square. If not, the blade's not going to be centered. And sometimes you can have trash and stuff like that. Make sure everything's clean. Right here you can see we've got early lockup, which is what I like to have. And you want to make sure it's solid. You don't want it breaking loose. And if you remember, we put a ramp in there on the detent. That really makes a smooth transition. It doesn't put a lot of pressure on your detent ball. Like I said before, if you're having the sticky lock problems, you can pull the spring back a little bit and or loosen your pivot, see what's going on there. Now, you're going to have to open and close these things 50 to 100 times. Break them in good and let that detent kind of wear a little groove in the blade. It's going to sound like it's galling up at first. You can even put a little drop of oil in there, which I would do anyway, and that'll help everything break in, and you just open and close them over and over and over. I got this one detent kind of tight right now. I'm going to break it in and then back it off as I wear it in. That's with the pocket clip on there. So I still have a little cleanup left to do. Make sure there's no sharp corners anywhere. It's all good and soft. And just one note about this design. You know, like I said, I designed it as a skinning knife. If you notice how the flipper is shaped comes down here and follows the contour of this finger groove. I wanted that to act kind of like a guard. A lot of people don't like flippers, and I understand, call them pocket peckers, but I don't have any problems with that. And we'll just show you how it goes into the pocket. So on to finishing. And like I said, there's a lot of ways to do the finishing. Depending on what you want or your customer want, you can bead blast them, stone wash them, you can bead blast them, anodize them, or just sand them smooth like I've done here and anodize them. These will all be anodized, but I'm not going to go through that process because it's a whole other video. And maybe we'll do that one day. But I will show you some shots of the finished work on them. But remember, if you got any questions, just leave them down below. I hope you enjoyed this series. I'm glad it's over. The views basically suck. But anyway, I'm glad those of you that did follow along, I appreciate it. I want to thank my patrons, and I want to thank you for watching. Now here's some shots of the finished knives.